I still remember the day I first met Tasha's sister, Dina. I had been dating Tasha for a little over a year, and the two of them were always strangely secretive around each other. It wasn't that they had some overt rivalry, nor did they radiate the typical sisterly warmth I'd observed in other families. It was something in between: hushed conversations, abrupt topic changes when someone else entered the room, veiled looks that sometimes ventured into tense territory. But at the time, I chalked it up to normal family quirks. When Tasha and I got married, Dina gave us a generous gift, a set of engraved champagne flutes, each etched with a filigree of vines and our initials twined together. "Best wishes for your future together," she had said. Her eyes flicked to me, and then to Tasha, and then she left the reception early. I found it odd but didn't dwell on it. Life has a way of burying small mysteries under bigger events. For the first few years, I had minimal interaction with Dina. She lived in another state, and Tasha wasn't exactly running to plan sisterly get-togethers. Occasionally, Dina would call my wife, and Tasha would pace around the house, pressing her phone to her ear like someone afraid to let her voice carry. If I happened to pass by, Tasha would wave me away or switch to a more cheerful, generic tone. It felt like eavesdropping, even though I was simply in my own home. Then Tasha would get off the call, stare out the window for a few minutes, and pretend nothing had happened. I supposed Dina had her own life. She was apparently engaged once, but Tasha said the engagement fell through for reasons never clarified. In those days, I never asked too many questions. I believed Tasha deserved privacy regarding her own family. We all come from complicated backgrounds, right? I felt that, as a partner, the best approach was often to listen rather than interrogate. But then, shortly after our 5th anniversary, Dina's presence in our lives became much more pronounced. She moved back to our city, saying she wanted to start fresh. Tasha looked uneasy when she told me. At the time, I thought she was just worried about old conflicts being dredged up. Dina wasn't typically open about her emotions, at least not around me, but from what I gleaned, she'd ended a difficult relationship. All Tasha shared was a vague anecdote about Dina discovering her fiancé's hidden secrets. A fiancé who turned out to be not only unscrupulous but downright dangerous. The details were minimal. Tasha clammed up if I inquired further. After that move, Dina began dropping by our house more often. Sometimes she arrived unannounced while Tasha was at work. She'd knock timidly on the door, share a cursory greeting, and peer around the living room like she expected to see something out of place. Those visits were brief and stilted, usually concluding with Dina ducking out, saying she just realized she had to be somewhere else. Yet, there was one incident that stuck in my mind. One afternoon, I was in the backyard trimming hedges. Dina must have assumed I wasn't home. I heard the front door click open. She had a key that Tasha had given her. By the time I came around the side of the house to greet her, she was already in the foyer, rummaging through a small chest we kept by the entrance where we stored mail and random knickknacks. Startled, she let out a yelp, nearly dropped a stack of letters, then promptly apologized. Her explanation? She was looking for Tasha's new address book. Apparently, Tasha had asked her to pick it up. I tried to shrug it off, but a small seed of doubt took root in my mind. Why not just ask Tasha directly or wait until Tasha was home? Not long after that, Tasha began staying out late more frequently. At first, it was work dinners or last-minute errands, so I kept my concerns to myself. I trusted my wife. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who leaps to the worst conclusions at every turn. But something else seemed off. The times never matched the stories. She'd say she was going to a meeting at 5 p.m., and I'd glance at her phone to see a text message with a drastically different schedule. We started drifting into separate routines, Tasha, the unpredictable spouse with plausible explanations, and me, the increasingly uneasy onlooker uncertain of how to voice my growing suspicions. During this tense period, Dina's visits turned even stranger. Sometimes she'd appear at our doorstep around dusk, breathless as though she'd rushed over. She'd ask if Tasha was home. When I said no, a fleeting spark of relief would flash across her face. Then she'd murmur something about needing to drop off or retrieve a book, an item of clothing, or any random thing. She'd rummage around, find something that may or may not have been relevant, and then slip away as quietly as she'd arrived. I thought about confronting Tasha multiple times, but never did. Instead, I nursed my suspicions in silence. I told myself that I was simply overreacting, that Dina's behavior came from her own unsettled circumstances. Tasha had become more distant, but relationships go through phases, right? We all have ups and downs. Yet a moment arrived when doubt turned into near certainty. One night, while Tasha was at a friend's, I decided to drive around to clear my head. The city was dark, the roads slick from an evening drizzle. I ended up near the downtown district, eyes wandering between traffic lights and the reflection of neon signs in the puddles. Then, as I passed a high-rise condominium building, I saw them. Tasha and a man I'd never met, stepping out of the glass doors, their faces briefly illuminated by the overhead lights. Tasha's expression was lit with an intensity of emotion I hadn't seen in a while. She leaned in toward him, said something, then gently touched his arm. It was intimate, perhaps not an outright embrace, but not a gesture one casually shares with a coworker. They lingered, locked in conversation, before both got into his sleek SUV and drove away. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding. I had no plan except to see where they would go. But they soon took an unexpected turn, and before I knew it, I lost them in the heavy traffic. I circled the block frantically, but they were gone. That night, Tasha came home later than usual. She mumbled an excuse about her friend's crisis, how it had taken longer to comfort her than she expected. I felt numb, so I simply nodded. Inside me, a storm raged, fear, betrayal, confusion, but also a resolute need for answers. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Was Dina aware? What on earth was going on? I tried to steel myself in the days that followed, waiting for the right moment to talk to Tasha. But I discovered that what I knew, what I thought I knew, was just the tip of the iceberg. Because somewhere along the way, Dina was acting with a certain assumption, she believed I had knowledge of something. And as it turned out, her sister didn't know I wasn't in the know. The truth that would soon unravel was more than just an affair. It was a tapestry of hidden motives and entangled secrets that, up until then, only Tasha and Dina fully understood. They had a complicated web between them, and I was standing on the verge of discovering it by pure accident. Would I turn a blind eye, or would I risk tearing the entire family apart in pursuit of the truth? That question lingered like a dark cloud above me, foreshadowing battles to come, battles for which I was woefully unprepared. The morning after I saw Tasha with the mysterious man, I woke up with questions swirling in my mind like a whirlwind. She was already out of bed, presumably in the kitchen making coffee. My heart thumped as I hurried through my morning routine, trying to figure out if I should confront her. But when I entered the kitchen, Tasha looked composed, too composed, as though the night before had been unremarkable. Her forced smile and a casual, "good morning," hit me like a jolt. Maybe I was searching for guilt etched into her face. Instead, I found only a practiced calm that made my blood run cold. I didn't bring it up, my nerve failed me. It was as if I feared how real it might become if I voiced my suspicions out loud. Did I really want to step over that line, from uneasy suspicion into the realm of certain heartbreak? For a moment, I rationalized my silence by thinking, maybe there's an innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew there wasn't. That same day, Dina called Tasha. I overheard part of the conversation from the other room, enough to pick up urgency in Dina's tone. Tasha kept her voice low, walking around in slow circles, occasionally throwing me a wary glance if I got too close. When she hung up, she announced she had to see Dina right away. Before I could ask why, she was already gathering her purse and keys. I was left with a flood of unspoken words and a bitter taste in my mouth. Their secret conversations continued for a few more days. Late-night phone calls, cryptic remarks. Dina stopped by once when Tasha wasn't home, and we stood in awkward silence in the living room, the ceiling fan buzzing overhead like a giant question mark. Dina tried to look casual, but I could sense her tension. She flipped her hair behind her shoulder and avoided direct eye contact. "Is Tasha around?" she asked. I shook my head. She had to work late. She shifted from foot to foot. "We were supposed to meet. She didn't tell you anything?" "Nothing," I replied, trying to read her expression. Did Dina expect me to know something else, something bigger? Because it felt like she was fishing for confirmation. Her question was more loaded than it appeared on the surface. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, muttered a hasty goodbye, and dashed out the door without explanation. I watched from the window as she disappeared into the dusk, my mind reeling with the possibility that Dina believed I was fully informed about whatever secrets Tasha had been feeding her. In the days that followed, my paranoia soared. I tried not to let it consume me, but I couldn't stop thinking about that man with Tasha. Each time she left the house, my heart would pound. Every delay returning home set me on edge. Our marriage, which I once considered sturdy, even if a bit routine, now felt like it was dangling over an abyss. And through it all, Dina weaved in and out of the background, somehow entangled in the same hidden drama. Nights stretched into a haze of restlessness. One evening, while Tasha was out yet again, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I searched our shared laptop, rummaging through history and downloads, but found nothing beyond typical everyday browsing. Then I combed through the desk drawers in Tasha's home office. Receipts, random notes, outdated warranties, nothing suspicious. But tucked behind a stack of old notebooks, I discovered a smaller notebook with an elastic band. The kind you could slip into a pocket or purse. Feeling a surge of guilt, I opened it, expecting to see grocery lists or workout logs. Instead, I found cryptic notations, each accompanied by times and dates. No names, just initials, MH repeated frequently. Some entries had short notes next to them: meeting, urgent, hotel lounge, bring docs. My pulse quickened. This was clearly more than random scribbles. If MH was the man I'd seen her with, then Tasha was definitely coordinating these rendezvous. A hotel lounge? Important documents? Why was my wife secretly meeting a man about docs, and why couldn't she mention it to me? I copied the dates into my phone, cross-referencing them with nights Tasha had claimed to be elsewhere. Many lined up perfectly with her work dinners or friend crises. My mind churned. Could she be cheating on me under the guise of some clandestine business dealing? Or was it something else entirely? And where did Dina fit into this? Her tension implied she was involved, or at least aware of what Tasha was up to. Perhaps Dina believed I was complicit or at least knowledgeable. Something told me that Dina's furtive visits weren't just about an idle curiosity. Driven by a mixture of desperation and grim resolve, I decided to find out more about MH. The next time Tasha stepped out, I tailed her. My adrenaline surged as I followed her car at a safe distance, headlights off at times to avoid detection. It felt surreal, like I was playing detective in a cheap thriller, but my life had turned into exactly that. She drove across town, stopping at an upscale hotel near the business district. I parked discreetly and watched from afar as she walked inside. Checking the time, I guessed she might go to the lounge on the second floor, where I'd once attended a conference. Heart hammering, I slipped into the lobby. Sure enough, hidden among the plush seating and subdued lighting, I spotted Tasha at a corner table with a man whose tailored suit and self-assured posture radiated wealth. I hovered behind a large potted plant, an absurd hiding spot, but it had to do. They were speaking in hushed tones. Occasionally, Tasha would glance nervously toward the entrance. I strained to make out snippets of conversation, but background chatter from other patrons muffled most words. All I could catch was, Tasha, we can't keep the man, we have no choice until. Tasha, this changes everything. He slid a folder across the table. Tasha thumbed through its contents, her face grim. Then she placed the folder in her bag, stood up abruptly, and left without a goodbye kiss or embrace. The man waited a few minutes before he, too, exited. I followed him. Outside, he handed a valet ticket to the attendant, who delivered a sleek black sedan. My heart drummed in my chest as I approached him just before he could climb in. Summoning courage, I spoke in a low voice, "Excuse me, you're MH, aren't you?" He froze, eyeing me warily. "Do I know you?" "You've been meeting with my wife," I said. "Tasha. I need answers." He took a step back, scanning the area as if assessing escape routes. A flicker of discomfort rippled across his features. "I don't know what you're talking about." His denial was unconvincing. I pressed forward, though my hands trembled. "Look, I'm not here to make a scene. I just want to understand what's happening. If you care about her at all, or at least respect her enough, tell me the truth." He hesitated, exhaling slowly. His eyes darted toward the hotel entrance, then back to me. "It's complicated," he said at last, his voice taut. "Try me," I shot back, frustration swelling in my chest. He glanced at the car, then muttered, "I only got involved because of Dina." I stiffened. "Dina? My wife's sister?" His gaze flickered. "I assumed you knew the situation. That Tasha told you." A wave of confusion hit me. So Tasha and Dina had been orchestrating something with this man, and he thought I was in on it. My stomach churned. "I'm in the dark," I said, a touch of bitterness creeping into my tone. "Tell me what it is you think I'm supposed to know." He looked torn, almost remorseful. "I can't. It's not my place. And trust me, you don't want to get caught in the middle." Before I could protest, he wrenched open his car door and slid inside, slamming it shut. The engine roared to life. As he pulled away, his parting words drifted out the window, "Ask your wife, or ask Dina. Just, be careful." I stood on the curb, lungs burning from the chill of night air. An entire swirl of unanswered questions loomed over me like a thick, choking fog. My wife. My sister-in-law. The man Tasha was meeting. They were all entangled in some secret that apparently had dangerous undertones. My confrontation with MH rattled me deeply. Once I was back home, I paced the living room like a caged animal. The walls felt as though they were closing in, brimming with secrets. Tasha wasn't home yet. Where had she gone after leaving the hotel? Who was this man to her, really? I was tempted to call Dina right then. Yet every time I pictured her picking up the phone, I imagined a swirl of lies or half-truths. And a single question gnawed at me: why did both Tasha and MH assume Dina was the link to it all? When Tasha finally returned, well past midnight, her eyes were bloodshot. She looked exhausted and didn't volunteer explanations. I considered cornering her with my knowledge, but something in her expression, an undercurrent of fear, maybe, made me hold back. In the days that followed, Tasha flitted around the house with restless energy. She avoided my gaze, offering only short answers to anything I asked, and the tension between us grew to a fever pitch. Our once cozy home atmosphere felt like a stage set, with me and Tasha acting out roles of a loving couple to nobody in particular. Then, one afternoon, Dina sent me a text message out of the blue. "Dina, I need to talk to you. ASAP. Alone." My heart pounded at the sight of it. What could Dina possibly have to tell me? Did she sense that I'd begun to unravel their secrets? I texted back, telling her I'd meet her at a quiet coffee shop downtown. We chose a corner table by a large window that overlooked a bustling street. Dina looked drawn, her usually vibrant eyes dull with anxiety. She fiddled with her cup, and I could see slight tremors in her hands. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "What's going on?" I asked. "And why do you think I know anything about it?" Her eyes flicked to me, startled. "What do you mean?" "Dina, don't play coy. MH told me you were the reason he got involved with Tasha, and that I should be careful. He seemed to think Tasha had already told me everything." She froze, the color draining from her face. You met him?" "Briefly. He was as cryptic as you and Tasha. But I'm done being kept in the dark. Are you going to tell me what's happening?" Dina drew a shaky breath and lowered her gaze. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Finally, she spoke. "I never thought it would get this far. Tasha swore we'd keep you out of it." I leaned forward, adrenaline surging. "Keep me out of what?" Her expression was unreadable. "Remember the ex-fiancé I had back in the day?" she asked softly. I nodded. Tasha had mentioned that Dina's fiancé turned out to be some sort of dangerous con man, though the details were murky. "That ex, his name is Martin Harrington. MH. The same man you saw Tasha with. I introduced them because of some unsettled debts he's collecting. But it's not money. It's information." My mind reeled. Tasha was meeting Dina's dangerous ex-fiancé. Why? "Start at the beginning," I pressed, voice trembling. "And don't leave anything out." Dina sighed, her shoulders slumping like the weight of the world pressed upon them. "Martin and I were engaged 2 years ago, but I discovered he was part of a larger scheme. He was blackmailing certain people, using personal secrets as leverage to force them into smuggling valuable documents, business or government secrets, I'm not entirely sure." I was horrified and cut ties. She glanced around the cafe warily, as though afraid of being overheard. "But Martin isn't the type to just walk away. He found out about Tasha's, well, her personal entanglements. Something big enough to use as leverage. Now he's threatening Tasha, claiming that if she doesn't help him with one final job, he'll expose her secrets and ruin her." My throat went dry. What secret is Tasha hiding that's so catastrophic? Dina's lower lip quivered. "I'm not entirely sure of all the details. But Tasha came to me for help after Martin approached her. She knew about my past with him, and she thought maybe I had some leverage or a way out. When Tasha told me she'd do whatever Martin asked to protect you, protect your life together, I tried to intervene. I blinked in disbelief. Tasha was doing this for me? She was risking involvement with a criminal, to keep a secret that would allegedly protect our marriage or safety? My thoughts tumbled in confusion. "So you and Tasha have been conspiring to deal with Martin, and you both assumed I already knew she was meeting him?" "Yes," Dina whispered. "When Tasha said she told you about everything, I believed her. I figured you two had some plan behind the scenes. But lately, she's been acting differently, shutting me out. I started to suspect something else was going on, maybe you and she were fighting or... I just didn't know." I swallowed hard, my emotions a swirling tempest of anger, betrayal, and an odd sense of empathy. Tasha was lying to me, but if her motive was to shield us from a bigger threat, it complicated everything. "You're telling me Tasha is risking her safety, our entire marriage, to help Martin get some documents, so he won't expose her? And that it has something to do with me?" My voice rose, drawing the attention of a nearby customer, so I forced myself to calm down. Dina nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know what Martin's endgame is. I only know Tasha's terrified of what he could reveal." "Then we need to stop him," I said, pressing my palms against the table. "Go to the authorities." Dina shook her head emphatically. "He's too well connected. And Tasha refuses to talk about it. She's convinced that if you find out certain details, it'll destroy your relationship." I stared at the swirling foam in my untouched latte. Just days ago, I thought the biggest threat was Tasha's potential affair. Now I was faced with an even darker scenario: blackmail, hidden truths, and a cunning man with a dangerous network. And, heartbreakingly, Tasha seemed more afraid of me discovering her secrets than confronting Martin head-on. For a moment, I wrestled with conflicting impulses: run to Tasha and demand an explanation, or keep silent and plan a strategic approach. But looking into Dina's haunted eyes, I knew I had no choice. I had to protect my wife, even if she'd lied to me. Yet before I took any decisive action, I had to know exactly what Tasha's secret was. What was she so desperate to hide that she'd entangle herself with a criminal to keep it buried? And even more troubling, why did Dina keep referring to the possibility that my knowledge, my involvement, could cause an irreparable break in our marriage? With my mind churning, I reached for Dina's trembling hand. "We have to work together," I said quietly. "If Tasha won't talk, we'll find another way to learn the truth." Dina nodded slowly, though the hopelessness in her eyes spoke volumes. "But be careful. Martin's watching every move we make. If he even suspects we're onto him, he might retaliate. And if Tasha panics," she let the sentence hang, the unspoken words leaving a chill in the air. I exhaled, feeling like I was stepping into quicksand, with each movement drawing me deeper. The clock was ticking, Martin was pulling the strings, and Tasha was locked in a perilous game, one she believed I was privy to. But I wasn't, not fully. All I knew for certain was that my wife's sister was right about one thing: Tasha thought I was in on the secret from the start. And I had no idea just how dangerous that misconception might prove to be. I left the coffee shop with Dina's revelations echoing in my mind. Martin Harrington wasn't just some casual fling, he was Dina's dangerous ex-fiancé, a man with enough blackmail material to twist Tasha into knots. The notion of Tasha being forced into secret dealings to protect us both made my chest tighten. This was bigger than infidelity or a momentary lapse in loyalty. It was about secrets so potent that Tasha feared they could tear our lives apart. Yet there remained an unshakable flicker of doubt: was Tasha only meeting Martin under duress, or had something else developed between them? Fear can bring people together, or push them apart. I kept replaying the moment I saw Tasha and Martin leaving that luxurious downtown building, locked in intense conversation. The way they hovered so closely, how her hand lingered on his arm. Could it have been more than fear and necessity binding them? My mind was still swirling hours later when Tasha got home. It was late evening. She slipped inside the front door with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her eyes darted to me, and for a second, we stood there in tense silence. "How was your day?" she asked. Her voice was subdued, as though bracing for a confrontation. I hesitated. Part of me was burning to shout, "I know about Martin. I know about the blackmail." But Dina's warning echoed in my mind. If I startled Tasha or pushed her too far, I might make a precarious situation even worse. I decided to bide my time, to see if she'd offer anything. "Uneventful," I lied, my tone clipped. She nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging. "I'm going to shower," she announced, heading down the hall without another word. I sank onto the couch, the cushion swallowing me whole. The sense of distance between us loomed so large it felt insurmountable. It was bizarre. Less than a year earlier, we'd been planning a dream vacation, laughing over which beaches had the softest sand. Now, we were two strangers in the same home, each harboring secrets from the other. The next day, I decided I couldn't remain on the sidelines any longer. If Tasha wasn't going to tell me the truth voluntarily, I'd have to gather more information myself, and hopefully find a way to end Martin's grip on her. I called Dina under the pretense of meeting for a quick lunch. She sounded nervous but agreed. We met at a small diner in a less fashionable part of town. The chatter of construction workers on their lunch break mingled with the clatter of plates, making our conversation feel less conspicuous. "Did Tasha say anything to you last night?" Dina asked immediately, leaning across the table. I shook my head. Not a word. Dina fidgeted with the plastic straw wrapper, tearing it into smaller and smaller pieces. She's in deeper than ever. I tried calling her this morning, but she wouldn't pick up. Do you have any idea what Martin is threatening to reveal? I pressed, keeping my voice low. You said it's big, but Tasha must have told you something. Is it about her job, our finances, something from her past? Dina swallowed, eyes darting downward. All I know is that it's personal, very personal. She hinted that it dates back before you two were even married. Something she never wanted you to discover. My stomach twisted in knots. There isn't much about Tasha's past that I don't already know, I murmured, but even as I said it, I realized how presumptuous it sounded. Everyone has shadows in their closet, especially from younger years. Perhaps Tasha's shadow was darker than I'd imagined. Dina crumpled the straw wrapper. Martin told her he'd leak every detail of it to you, and then to certain authorities, if she refuses to cooperate. I inhaled sharply. Authorities? Are we talking about legal trouble? She shrugged helplessly. I really don't know. I only know Tasha's convinced that if you learn these details, your marriage is finished, and that you might face collateral damage too. A cold sweat prickled across my skin. This was more complicated than just preserving Tasha's pride. If the authorities were involved, it suggested something illegal or at least borderline criminal. As we talked, a thought struck me, what if I approached Martin directly? I had cornered him once, and he'd clammed up, but maybe there was a better way. But would that push him to retaliate, seeing me as a threat instead of a clueless bystander? I glanced at Dina. Have you kept any evidence of his dealings from when you were engaged, emails, texts, receipts? Maybe we can use that to blackmail him right back. She went pale. I might still have some old messages. But confronting Martin with them is risky. He's well connected, some of those connections are law enforcement officers on his payroll, or so he's implied. If we show our hand prematurely, it could backfire. I exhaled slowly. Everything about this felt like treading a minefield. One wrong move and everything blows up. That night, Tasha came home somewhat earlier than usual. She headed straight for her office, which she'd locked whenever she wasn't inside, another new habit I'd noticed. Sensing an opportunity, I knocked. She opened the door just enough to peer out. Yes. Hey, I said softly, trying to sound calm. I miss talking to you. Can we just sit down and be honest with each other? Her face clouded with panic, and she stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her. I'm really tired, okay? Maybe later. No, I said, more firmly than I intended. I want to talk now. This distance between us is killing me. Tasha's eyes glistened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw fear and longing. She almost reached for my hand, then seemed to remember herself and withdrew. I have a lot on my plate. Work's been rough, and I'm dealing with some personal issues. She refused to elaborate. My frustration rose, but I managed to keep my tone steady. Tasha, you can tell me anything. Whatever you're facing, we can handle it together. She pressed her lips together. Not this, she whispered. Not if you want to keep us safe. With that cryptic comment, she slipped past me and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me reeling. The following day, an envelope arrived in the mail with no return address. I recognized Dina's handwriting in the neat block letters spelling out my name. Inside was a USB flash drive wrapped in a note. This is all I have. It might help you understand Martin, and Tasha, better. But be careful. Dina. A jolt of anticipation shot through me. I raced to my computer and inserted the drive. There were dozens of files, PDF documents, scans of letters, screenshots of text conversations. Many referenced Martin Harrington, his old business ventures, strange bank transfers, references to potential shell companies. One folder contained partial transcripts of chat messages between him and someone identified by the screen name Rose_Eclipse. I clicked open a text file labeled Correspondence. Inside were fragments of a conversation. Martin was instructing Rose_Eclipse on how to smuggle sensitive financial documents out of a local firm. The context was disjointed. It looked like Dina had only managed to save partial logs. But one snippet stood out. Martin, will need final verification. Make sure your contact inside the company seals them properly. Rose_Eclipse, yes, but they're suspicious. I can't do it for free anymore. Martin, fine. The arrangement stands, your secret stays buried if you cooperate. My heart hammered. Could Rose_Eclipse be Tasha's alias? Could the arrangement be the one Tasha was now forced to continue? I scanned more files, my fingers trembling on the mouse. Receipts for expensive hotel stays, some signed by Martin. A few screenshots of wire transfers to overseas accounts. The amounts were massive, way beyond anything Tasha and I could ever imagine. This wasn't just petty blackmail, it was organized crime, verging on espionage. Then I found an older photograph, half obscured by digital artifacts. It showed Dina and Martin at some sort of gala event, both smiling. But behind them stood Tasha, looking younger, her expression caught somewhere between apprehension and forced pleasure. They were all connected back then, long before I'd truly known Tasha's family. I immediately called Dina. She answered in a hurried tone. You got the drive? Yes, I replied breathlessly. This is bigger than I thought. She sighed. I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to warn you without scaring you off. Those files are from when I first discovered Martin's illegal activities. He must have roped Tasha in at some point, maybe she did him a small favor, and then he held it over her head. Once you two got married, Tasha probably panicked. She never wanted you involved, so she kept everything hidden. Do you think Tasha's the one using that Rose_Eclipse alias? I asked. Dina's pause was telling. I suspect so. I recognized certain details in the chat logs, references to your city, certain personal facts. If Tasha's being blackmailed, Martin's probably still holding that threat over her. It's been years, but he's never let go. A wave of confusion washed over me. But Tasha's not even in the same line of work as Martin. How would he use her now? Dina's voice trembled. He needs a final piece of information from her, something that will tie up his operations neatly, maybe something only Tasha can access. I don't know. The bottom line is, she's terrified. I raked a hand through my hair, glancing at the clock. It was nearing midnight. Tasha was in the next room, presumably asleep. What if we go to the police with this drive? I asked desperately. Couldn't they help? Dina's chuckle was hollow. Martin has a way of surviving investigations. He's always a step ahead. Besides, this data alone might not be enough to incriminate him fully, he'll claim it's fabricated or out of context. And if we move against him, Tasha's secret becomes public domain. I closed my eyes. A rock and a hard place. Tasha was cornered, and if I pushed too hard, I might destroy any chance of salvaging our marriage, or worse, get her tangled in a criminal investigation that could ruin us both. Then we have to find out exactly what Tasha is trying to protect, I said firmly, though the words felt heavy. If we know her secret, we can make a plan, maybe even cut a deal, or find a way to shield her from Martin's threats. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Dina replied, agreed. But how do we get Tasha to confess when she believes you knowing the truth is the worst possible outcome? I didn't have an immediate answer. But a rising determination welled within me. This was no longer just about Tasha possibly cheating or lying. It was about freeing her, freeing us, from a master manipulator. At last, I said, I'll have to force her hand. If I confront her with enough evidence, she might realize she has no choice but to let me in. We can't keep dancing around this. Dina sighed, her voice resigned. Be gentle. She's fragile right now. And watch out for Martin. He's lethal when cornered. We hung up. My mind was already spinning scenarios, ambushing Tasha with the drive's contents, or maybe coaxing her into a calm, sit-down talk. Yet each plan teetered on a razor's edge. A single miscalculation, and Martin might retaliate. A single harsh word, and Tasha might shut me out forever. I stared at the USB drive still clutched in my hand. For an object so small, it carried an immense weight, the key to Tasha's secrets and Martin's downfall. Her sister didn't know I wasn't in the know. That phrase circled back in my thoughts, more resonant than ever. Dina had assumed I was Tasha's confidant from the start, when all along, I'd been adrift in the shadows. Now I stood at the threshold of a new chapter in this twisted saga, one in which I'd have to decide how far I was willing to go to protect the woman I loved, and whether love alone could endure the brutal truths lurking beneath her silence. I barely slept the night I discovered Dina's USB drive, my thoughts caught in a loop of half-formed plans and dread. By morning, I was resolved, I had to confront Tasha. Not with anger or accusation, but with undeniable proof that I knew her world was crumbling, and that I wanted to help her rebuild it. If we were going to break free of Martin's grip, there could be no more secrets between us. When Tasha returned from an errand that day, her face was drawn, her hair damp from a sudden downpour outside. I stood in the living room, the USB drive pinched between my thumb and forefinger. She set her keys on the table and froze, eyes on the flash drive. "What's that?" she asked, her voice guarded. I swallowed hard. "It's everything you and Dina have been hiding from me." Her expression flickered through alarm, desperation, and resignation in quick succession. "Where did you get it?" "Dina gave it to me," I said. She thought I already knew everything. But I didn't, until now. Tasha stared at the tiny device like it was a loaded weapon. She took a shaky step forward, then sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I can't keep lying," she whispered, her voice muffled. "But if I tell you everything, you'll hate me." I moved closer, my heart pounding. "I promise you, whatever it is, we'll find a way through it. But I can't fight if I don't know what I'm up against." Her hands fell to her lap, revealing tear-streaked cheeks. In that moment, the strong-willed, determined Tasha I'd married looked heartbreakingly vulnerable. "All right," she murmured. "I'll tell you." What followed were fragments, glimpses of a tangled past. Years ago, she'd been approached by Martin. At the time, she was desperate, burdened by debts and an ailing family member's medical expenses. Martin offered quick money if she could pass along sensitive financial data from her job. She wasn't a high-level executive, but she had enough access to make a difference. She did it, just once. But it was enough for Martin to lock his hooks into her. He documented everything. Afterward, Tasha tried to extricate herself. She'd paid off the debts, convinced herself that was the end of it. Except Martin had other plans, blackmail. He kept the evidence of her illicit action, threatening to expose her to the company, to law enforcement, and, eventually, to me. Tasha swallowed hard, tears glistening in her eyes. When we met, it felt like a fresh start. I thought Martin would let me go. But after Dina broke off her engagement with him, he came back around, wanting more. This time, it wasn't just about money. He wanted me to retrieve documents, arrange introductions, illegal deals. I refused, but he kept pushing. When that didn't work, he threatened to tell you about my past. I was terrified you'd leave me. Terrified you'd get dragged into it. My chest felt tight. "Tasha, I wish you'd told me." She shook her head, wincing. I was ashamed. And then, once we were married, the stakes were even higher. My job. Our reputation. The possibility of prison time if Martin forwarded evidence to the authorities. I couldn't see a way out. I sank onto the couch beside her, trying to parse my emotions, anger that she'd hidden all this, sorrow that she'd felt so alone, and a flicker of relief that she was finally opening up. Is that why you kept seeing him? Handing over documents? She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Dina tried to help. We thought if Martin got what he wanted, he'd leave us alone for good. But it only made him greedier. Everything escalated when you started to suspect I was hiding something. I panicked. A surge of protectiveness overcame me. We can't let him do this anymore. There has to be a way to expose him, to protect you. Tasha's gaze flicked up, desperation shining in her eyes. Expose him how? If we bring this to the authorities, they'll charge me, too. And Martin has friends in high places. You don't understand how powerful he is. I gently took her hand. Then we'll figure it out together. I promise. She nodded reluctantly, though fear still lingered behind her eyes. For now, it was enough that she'd finally let me in. We were on the same side, no longer separated by secrecy and lies. Over the next several days, Tasha and I pored over the files Dina had saved. We spent long nights strategizing in hushed voices, refusing to sleep until we'd covered every angle. Dina joined us in secret, slipping into our house under cover of darkness to avoid Martin's watchful gaze. We gleaned a few crucial details. Martin's next move: he was poised to broker a final deal involving stolen financial intel. Once it was complete, he'd vanish with a huge payday. His weak links: despite his wealth and connections, Martin's Achilles' heel was his reliance on fear. If we could disrupt that, maybe by making him believe we had even greater power or evidence, he might fold. Legal landmines: Tasha risked criminal charges if all her past cooperation came to light. We needed a strategy that exposed Martin while casting doubt on her involvement, or at least mitigating the consequences. Yet our plan was no more than a shaky scaffold. What if Martin calls our bluff? What if he retaliates before we can complete our setup? Each question gnawed at us, fueling an undercurrent of anxiety. One evening, Dina arrived with a trembling sense of urgency. Martin's suspicious. I saw him parked outside my building. He questioned me about whether you two were coordinating something. Tasha's face paled. He knows we've been in touch. Dina nodded. He didn't say so outright, but I could see it in his eyes. He's closing in. Before we could spiral into panic, I gripped their hands, trying to instill calm. We stick to the plan. Lay low, act normal. We'll gather the last piece of evidence. Then we'll confront him where we have the advantage. No one spoke for a beat, fear stark in their expressions. Finally, Tasha exhaled. If we fail, we lose everything. I squeezed her hand. But if we succeed, we get our lives back. 2 nights later, while Tasha was out picking up groceries, someone knocked at our door. I assumed it was Dina, until I opened up and found Martin Harrington himself standing there. He wore a tailored suit, exuding that chilly poise I remembered from our first encounter. A small smile curved his lips, but it never reached his eyes. "Good evening," he said, stepping forward as if expecting an invitation inside. I was hoping we could chat. My heart pounded, but I forced a neutral expression. "Tasha's not here." He nodded, unfazed. "I'm aware. I came to speak with you." I blocked the doorway, doing my best to appear calm. "I'm listening." Martin clasped his hands behind his back, glancing around the porch with a casual air. "I'm not your enemy. In fact, I'd like to think we share a mutual interest, Tasha's well-being." I almost laughed, his concern for Tasha's well-being. But I bit it back. "Then stop blackmailing her." He said softly, as if addressing a petulant child. "It's not blackmail. It's a business arrangement. She made certain choices, which now carry consequences. Anger flared in my chest. You're exploiting a mistake she made years ago. His expression hardened. Yes, I am. Because that's how power works. People with skeletons in their closet are the easiest to manipulate. But trust me when I say, I don't want Tasha harmed. I just want the final favor she owes me. I folded my arms, adrenaline making my voice quaver. She owes you nothing. Ah, but she believes otherwise, he replied, arching an eyebrow. And that's all that matters. You know, I'd hoped you two would handle this discreetly. Now, it seems you're forcing my hand. If you keep resisting, I might have to show you how serious I am. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small USB drive, its casing identical to the one Dina had given me. This is everything Tasha did to help me. Emails, scans, even a video of her accessing forbidden files. Imagine how the police, and your colleagues, would react. My stomach twisted. Threaten us again, and I'll. He raised a hand to cut me off. Now. There's no need for violence. I'm simply outlining the stakes. If you cooperate, I'll let Tasha walk away with minimal repercussions. If you try to sabotage me, I'll make sure your lives become unrecognizable. The words hung in the cold night air. Then Martin gave a mock-friendly nod, turned, and walked away, disappearing into a sleek car idling by the curb. My entire body shook with anger and fear as I closed the door. Tasha arrived moments later, grocery bags in hand, and found me leaning against the wall, breathing in uneven gulps. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the bags aside. Her voice trembled even before I spoke. She seemed to sense Martin's presence had tainted the air. "He was here," I managed. "He wants you to finish his final favor or he'll destroy us." Tasha's eyes glistened with tears. "He'll never let us go, will he?" I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way." The next day, we were supposed to enact the plan. Tasha had set up a fake handoff to Martin, promising to deliver the last sensitive files at a secluded location in exchange for all evidence of her wrongdoing. Dina would be waiting nearby with a camera, hoping to record Martin's threats, real-time proof of his criminal conduct. It wasn't ironclad, but if we caught his admission on video, we could tip the scales in our favor. As dusk approached, Tasha paced the living room, checking her phone repeatedly. Dina had gone on ahead to set up her vantage point. My heart hammered at the thought of Tasha confronting Martin face to face, again. Every muscle in my body screamed to do it myself, but Tasha insisted that Martin would only trust her. She paused mid-step, eyes anxious. What if he sees through this? I tried to smile reassuringly, though my nerves were shot. Then we adapt. We won't be far behind. Tasha swallowed hard and nodded, stepping toward me. Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and vulnerability. "I'm sorry. For lying. For dragging you into this." I drew her into a tight embrace, pressing my cheek against her hair. "We'll face it together. Just come back to me, no matter what happens." Her eyes were filled with tears when she pulled away. "I love you." "I love you, too," I whispered, ignoring the knot in my stomach. With that, she slipped out the door. I stood there, the echo of her footsteps down the driveway resonating like a drumbeat signaling the start of a war. For the next hour, I sat with my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for Tasha or Dina to call. Night thickened, the clock ticking ominously. Streetlights glowed outside, casting elongated shadows across the walls. My heart pounded in my ears, and every passing minute felt like an eternity. Finally, my phone buzzed. I snatched it up, nearly dropping it in my haste, only to see a text from Dina. "Dina, 9:37 p.m., something's happening. Not sure if Martin suspects. Tasha's still talking to him. Stay alert. Another 15 minutes trickled by in suffocating silence, then came another message. Dina, 9:52 p.m. He just grabbed Tasha's arm. She's trying to reason with him. I bolted upright, pulse hammering. I texted back. Me, I'm coming. No reply. My mind raced. Was Tasha in immediate danger, or was it just Martin's intimidation? Should I wait for Dina's signal, or was every second I hesitated putting Tasha at greater risk? I headed for the door, adrenaline lighting a fire in my veins. But as I reached for the knob, my phone buzzed once more. With a trembling hand, I glanced at the screen. Unknown number, 9:58 p.m. Don't. If you want her safe, stay put. MH. The text battered my already frayed nerves. Martin had my number. He was orchestrating every movement. I froze, torn between rescue and compliance, between saving Tasha and blowing our plan wide open. If I followed Martin's order, was I abandoning Tasha to his mercy? If I rushed in, would I make things worse? The phone slid in my sweaty grip, the next moment teetering between dreadful possibility and frantic hope. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the living room. Thunder rumbled in the distance, an omen of the storm bearing down on all of us. My heart clenched at the thought of Tasha facing Martin alone under that darkening sky. I glanced at the front door, then back at the phone in my hand. My mind reeled. Would Dina's evidence be enough to expose Martin and spare Tasha from prosecution? Could Martin have already discovered Dina's setup, and if so, what would he do? Was Tasha truly safe from harm, or had she just walked into a trap? And what might Tasha still be hiding, even now? I stood at the threshold, one step away from the stormy night. My entire body trembled with indecision, pinned beneath a suffocating weight of dread. Somewhere out there, Tasha's fate hung in the balance, tangled with Martin's final ploy. Outside, the rain began to fall, each droplet tapping against the windows like a frantic warning. My phone buzzed yet again, but I hesitated to look at it. One more message could change everything, or confirm my worst fears. And in that suspended breath, the story hung between what was known and unknown, what was said and unsaid, what choices were left and what dangers lurked on the other side of the door. I never did hear the last phone call ring, nor did I see the final text that flashed across my screen. By the time I glanced down, it was too late to guess how the pieces would land, too late to know whether Tasha and Dina's desperate plan had succeeded, or if Martin Harrington's cunning had claimed another victory. I opened the door, stepping onto the porch into the darkness, into the storm, into whatever awaited me. And so it ended, and so it began, my journey into a night of secrets, danger, and the hope that love might prevail in the face of everything conspiring to tear it apart.